Remember that I forgot something once, so I better get it all down. So, welcome to another January Stafford celebration. This event is sponsored in part by the Friends of William Stafford, and more about that organization a little later in the program, and by local writers and others interested in Stafford. I want to thank Quentin Hallett for her help in getting things organized and providing our email link with John Daniel. Thanks to Martha. Yeah, we don't have emails. We don't have a lot of things.
We're confirmed old Luddites, likely to remain so.
Okay, and thanks to Martha and everyone else who brought food and drink for all of us to enjoy. And always a special thank to Scott and Tsunami Books for providing this great venue. And of course, thanks to John Daniel for joining us this day. We come to these events to explore William Stafford's ideas and writing, and to help in that exploration, John Daniel will talk to us about some of those elements and ideas. Now, after John has had his say, we'll take about another 10-minute break or so, and everyone can have more food, drink, and resume their conversations, and then we'll settle back in for poems and stories from all the rest of us. Now, some people have asked me about the procedure for the open mic part of the reading, and we can give more details about that as we start the second half, but generally, we don't have a sign-up sheet. We just let people read as the Spirit moves them, and it seems to work out pretty good. There's always lots of people with a poem to read. Now, John Daniel has published 9 books of prose and poetry, and his poems have appeared in numerous magazines and anthologies. For 23 years, he was the poetry editor for Wilderness magazine. He's a former Wallace Stegner Fellow in Poetry at Stanford University, and is the recipient of 3 Oregon Book Awards and many other notable awards and honors. His most recent book is Of Earth, New and Selected Poems. In his introduction to that book, he writes, and I copied it wrong, I think it is in poetry, I want to touch the beauty, integrity, and mystery of the given world, which I call nature. To celebrate that world, I believe, is as important as to decry its ruin. To celebrate it is to decry its ruin. My intent is that each poem should embody its portion of truth in ways accessible to the ordinary reader. My aim is to attend to the living world and make true reports. Yeah, attend and make true reports. Sounds very much like Stafford to me. So here's John Daniel to give us some of his thoughts.
Thank you. It's great to see so many of us gathered here in the spirit of Bill Stafford. I want to thank Jerry and Martha, Quentin, and all the other FOBs. That's FOB, Friends of Bill. I want to thank Scott Landfield and Tsunami Books, one of the key cultural institutions in this town. And I want to thank you for turning out. There are many aspects of William Stafford and his work worth discussing. Stafford the humorist, Stafford the stern prophet, Stafford the slippery shapeshifter, Stafford the formalist and artful rhymer, Stafford the teacher, Stafford the gadfly, to name just a few. I'm going to say a few words about Stafford, the nature poet and nature thinker. I'm going to read several of his poems, one by Robinson Jeffers and 3 or 4 of my own. The latter is a way of showing my debt to Bill as a poet and as a way of showing that I am not above plugging my new book. Back in the late 1970s, when I first read and then met Bill Stafford, I picked up Robert Bly's pioneering anthology of nature poems, News of the Universe, and was surprised to find Bly writing in his introduction that Bill considered himself a disciple of Robinson Jeffers. William Stafford, with his warmth and humanity, his welcoming spirit, his humor, his quiet, even diffident style on the page, gentle William Stafford in the lineage of the cold and austere Jeffers, who in his stern detachment related to rocks better than he did to people, and would, by his own account, except for the penalties, sooner have killed a man than a hawk? Oh yes, I soon discovered. Though Bill, we can safely say, would sooner not kill a man or a hawk. He was so taken with Jeffers' verses as a very young man that he hitchhiked from Kansas to Carmel to meet the gaunt, hawk-faced poet. I don't know how that visit went, but as I read more of Bill's work, I came to see that he and Jeffers had similar visions of the natural world and of our peculiar human insanity that has come from distancing ourselves from that world. Listen first to Jeffers with his prophetic voice and biblical rhythms in a poem called Return. A little too abstract, a little too wise, it is time for us to kiss the earth again. It is time to let the leaves rain from the skies, let the rich life run to the roots again. I will go down to the lovely Sur rivers and dip my arms in them up to the shoulders. I will find my accounting where the alder leaf quivers and the ocean wind over the river boulders. I will touch things and no more thoughts. And now Stafford, in his much more matter-of-fact, plain-style voice, writing of turning from television to a different kind of news. Evening news. That one great window puts forth its own scene, the whole world alive in glass. In it a war happens, only 1/8 of an inch thick. Some of our friends have leaped through, disappeared, become unknown voices and rumors of crowds. In our thick house, every evening I turn from that world, and room by room I walk to enjoy space. At the sink I start a faucet. Water from far is immediate on my hand. I open our door to check where we live. In the yard I pray birds, wind, unscheduled grass, that they please help to make everything go deep again. The real news, he says, is right outside the door. And for Bill Stafford, it doesn't have to be a charismatic landscape, such as Jeffers fell in love with at Big Sur and the Monterey coast. Run-of-the-mill birds, wind, and unscheduled grass, I love that phrase, will do. Will bespeak the integrity of nature as truly as dramatic sea cliffs in the boisterous surf at Point Lobos. The Kansas plains will do. The Willamette Valley makes the grade. Reader, he's saying, wherever you live. Go deep again is a recurring notion in Bill's poetry. He approaches it more abstractly in these last 2 stanzas from his poem, Bifocal. As fire burns the leaf, and out of the green appears the vein in the center line, and the legend veins under there, so the world happens twice. Once, what we see it as. Second, it legends itself deep, the way it is. What we see in our human way is not necessarily the way things are. The world is deep with a mystery that we have lost contact with. Maybe something like a conscious mind that thinks it knows its way, but has lost its rooting in the fertile depths of the unconscious. Not all down there is benign by any means, but that deep legend feeds us our vitality, and steers us in crucial ways through dreams and reveries and half-heard murmurings from within. Here's a poem that comes at this disconnection not in terms of depth and surface, but of inside and outside, toned with both a light wit and a hint of warning. It's titled Outside. The least little sound sets the coyotes walking the edge of our comfortable earth. We look inward, but all of them are looking toward us as they walk the earth. We need to let animals loose in our houses, the wolf to escape with a pan in his teeth, and streams of animals toward the horizon, racing with something silent in each mouth. For all we have taken into our keeping and polished with our hands belongs to a truth greater than ours, in the animals' keeping. Coyotes are circling around our truth. My own sense of belonging to the world and my work as a writer and poet owe a considerable debt. First to Jeffers, whom I discovered when still in high school back east, though I discovered him out of high school. Even today, he's hardly taught in high schools and not that much in colleges. Yet is the second best-selling American poet of the 20th century behind Robert Frost. He has a following. And then to Stafford, whose work I found my way to after having corrected the mistake of being born on the wrong side of the continent. Neither poet was consciously in my mind when I began this poem, but as I took it through draft after draft, I caught whiffs of the influence of both. Snow camping poem from the Southern Oregon Cascades called In Sky Lake's Wilderness. Winter tells the old stories. The lakes are shut like eyelids. Earning heat to pay the wind, we thread our skis between dark firs, pitch camp as the gray light leaves. Our fire throws wild shadows against the circling forest wall, while beyond that little room where we drink whiskey, laughing, the cold stars glint, the wind touches every tree. Later, inside our tent, we feel the air go still, a heaviness, and soon the ticking of fine snowfall. As we drift in and out of sleep, we hear the silent storm begin to bury us, to mound us under like the bowed young firs. Our fire hisses faintly as snow cools and covers it. Nothing then except the creak of limbs taking on the slow familiar weight and the small whistling flurries of the wind. Anything we are makes no difference in this place, where trees, wind, and falling snow work their ways together in the stillness they have always known. What strange joy to huddle here, buried in our single warmth, listening to what lives outside our lives. Poetry, to Bill, was not just an aesthetically pleasing construct of phrases or a means of showing off his sensibility, not just verbal art for art's sake. A poem was a form of oblique communication, a little heap of twigs that a reader might or might not kindle in reading it. I heard Bill say more than once that he wanted to be taught by poems he read. He hoped to learn something about living a human life. Old-fashioned idea. We could use it back. In his own poems, he did not shrink from the poet's ancient responsibility to, in a phrase from one of his best-known poems, think hard for us all. He did not do this in an explanatory or didactic way. He didn't orate or preach or go in for tub thumping. He suggested, he nudged, he slyly opened possibilities in the reader's imagination. Here's one that's a little more direct than most. It's called At the Unnational Monument Along the Canadian Border. This is the field where the battle did not happen, where the unknown soldier did not die. This is the field where grass joined hands, where no monument stands, and the only heroic thing is the sky. Birds here fly without any sound, unfolding their wings across the open. No people killed or were killed on this ground, hallowed by neglect and an air so tame that people celebrated by forgetting its name. It's the grass, the birds, the sky that we should celebrate, the natural integrity of the land that we could share in and even learn from if we take a break from killing one another and blowing things up and running around utterly enclosed in our human lives. Acts of war are not news. They're the oldest news in the world. How about we memorialize peace? Bill was a thoroughgoing pacifist, a conscientious objector during World War II, a popular war when being a CO took more courage than it did during the less popular wars that followed. He did 4 years of physical labor in forest camps for $2.50 a month, and went on to put in an entire lifetime of waging peace, along with his wife Dorothy, whom he met and married while in the work camps, and who earlier this month turned 97 years old in Portland. Robinson Jeffers gave up on what he called the sick microbe of humanity. His cynicism may yet prove justified, but William Stafford took a harder course. He bore lifelong witness against the unjust and destructive tendencies of our culture because he thought we can do better. The Unnational Monument poem and others of its kind entered the compost of my own imagination long ago, and surely informed the writing of this poem of mine, particularly its beginning, after which it veers more toward metaphysics than social commentary. I even took the same, used the same trick in my title. His is At the Unnational Monument. My title is Dependence Day. It would be a quieter holiday. No fireworks or loud parades, no speeches, no salutes to any flag. A day of staying home instead of crowding away. A day we celebrate nothing gained in war, but what we're given. How the sun's warmth is democratic, touching everyone, and the rain is democratic too. How the strongest branches in the wind give themselves as they resist, and give themselves. How birds could have no freedom without the planet's weight to wing against. How Earth itself could come to be only when a whirling cloud of dust pledged allegiance as a world, circling dependently around a star, and the star blossomed into fire from the ash of other stars, and once, at the dark zero of our time, a blaze of revolutionary light exploded out of nowhere, out of nothing, because nothing needed the light, as the brilliance of the light itself needs nothing. For many years, I misinterpreted a key line in one of William Stafford's best-known poems, which I read on the radio 3 days ago, and I'll read again now. Traveling through the dark. Traveling through the dark, I found a deer dead on the edge of the Wilson River Road. It is usually best to roll them into the canyon. That road is narrow. To swerve might make more dead. By glow of the taillight, I stumbled back of the car and stood by the heap. A doe, a recent killing. She had stiffened already, almost cold. I dragged her off. She was large in the belly. My fingers touching her side brought me the reason. Her side was warm. Her fawn lay there waiting, alive, still, never to be born. Beside that mountain road, I hesitated. The car aimed ahead, its lowered parking lights. Under the hood purred the steady engine. I stood in the glare of the warm exhaust turning red. Around our group, I could hear the wilderness listen. I thought hard for us all, my only swerving, then pushed her over the edge. into the river. I thought hard for us all, he writes, and for years I understood him to mean that he thought hard for all of us motorists who travel through the dark and the light, and sometimes, by no will of our own, kill other creatures or encounter creatures already killed. On the one hand, for a car to follow, to swerve might make more dead. On the other, there's a life, a new life, inside the extincted life of the doe. There was no way to deliver it, though, no way to save it. So it's a no-brainer to roll the deer off the road into the canyon. And that's true. But listen to that line again, with the 4 lines that come before it. The car aimed ahead, its lowered parking lot lights. Under the hood purred the steady engine. I stood in the glare of the warm exhaust turning red. Around our group, I could hear the wilderness listen. I thought hard for us all. So what's this group around our group? It's just the narrator and the killed doe, okay, and the live fetus inside the doe. And, oh yeah, that car, aiming its lights ahead and purring, like a house cat maybe, or like a lion on the Serengeti, who perhaps just killed a nice meal. But a particular kind of lion, a slave lion, trained to the service of the narrator and his species. That's the group, and around our group I could hear the wilderness listen. I thought hard for us all. He's thinking not just for himself, not just for other humans, not just for the group behind the car. He's thinking for all the lives of that wilderness listening around him. Us all is a community far transcending the human. Buddhists evoke it when they say, sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. The Lakota invoke it when they say, entering the sweat lodge, Mitakwiasin, all my relations. In the moment, of course, the no-brainer remains a no-brainer. The doe is dead. Her fawn can't be saved. Leaving her lie could make more dead. But that situation can exist and must be understood only as part of a larger no-brainer. Who builds these smooth asphalt ribbons across the ancient pathways of wild creatures? Who glides along those ribbons at speed in their purring mechanical lions, thumping aside such lives that get in their way? And who, of all that largest community, who is the one who claims to be the most capable of forethought and to have the most control over his actions and to live an examined life? Bill Stafford isn't saying tear up the asphalt. He made use of that pavement. He isn't saying junk your purring lion and never drive another. He drove and was driven in such lions. He is saying that in a world such as this, that we have so engrossed with ourselves and our buildings and machines, there are no no-brainers. The least we owe is to fully consider the true extent of the all we are members of, and to commit our actions, whatever they be, in full presence and awareness. Think, he's saying. Think hard for us all. There's one more aspect of this poem, an aspect of craft that I'd like to point out. It may seem a slight consideration, but it speaks to the artistry of a poet whose language, whose manner of expression can seem casual or offhand. Indeed, that's part of its charm. In the Unnational Monument poem, I'm sure you heard the rhyming. Birds fly here without any sound, unfolding their wings across the open. No people killed or were killed on this ground, hallowed by neglect and an air so tame that people celebrate it by forgetting its name. That's full rhyme, rhyme that is clear and complete to the ear. I want to show you that Traveling Through the Dark is also a rhyming poem, of a more subtle kind. The rhymes aren't full but partial, a consonant sound or a vowel sound, not an entire word. The poem is in 4 stanzas of 4 lines each, with a 2-line stanza at the end. Here are the end words of the 2nd and 4th lines of each 4-line stanza, and I'll exaggerate the rhyming sound. Road, dead, killing, belly, waiting, hesitated, engine, listen. And the end words of the 2-line stanza, swerving, river. Just touches of rhyme, slight inflections, just enough in the lightest of ways to pulse the sense of the poem home. There may be oregano or thyme, maybe, in a stew, and you can't taste it surely enough to recognize it. But if it weren't in the stew, you might, or might not, miss it. The stew might not be just right. That's how this kind of rhyming works. And William Stafford was an American master of it. I too have a deer kill poem from an experience that came before I knew Bill's poem, but the poem was written years later in full knowledge of Bill's. My experience required perhaps a harder action than Bill's did, but the issue I raised from it is simpler. I didn't think I could write such a poem and publish it without acknowledging Bill's poem, so I put a small cryptic epigraph under the title. The title is A Crossing, and the phrase from Bill, my only swerving, W.S. Blinded in light, the deer stopped. My fender crumpled, hurled her down the bank. I found her thrashing, the broken legs trying to run. Pleading, hating her ruined life, I grabbed a rock and hammered her head, again and again, and stood breathing hard in the silence of stars and pines, smeared rock a perfect fit in my fingers. Again my headlights tunneled the dark. I gripped the wheel, one of the strangers who kill at any crossing, without the stomach to pay dead life, the respect of an honest hunger. Number 1 best reason for carrying a gun in a vehicle if you live in the country. I'd like to finish my part of the program with a brief remembrance of Bill I was asked to write for the magazine Western American Literature shortly after he died in August 1993. Next year we get to celebrate his centennial. 1914, Hutchinson, Kansas. I quote a few lines from his poems, and before I read the remembrance, I'd like to read the poem I quote right at the end. It's one of my favorites. It's titled, With Neighbors, One Afternoon. Someone said, stirring their tea, I would come home any time just for this, to look out the clear backyard sky, and then into the cup. You could see the tiniest pattern of bark on the trees, and every slight angle of color change in the sunshine. Millions of miles of gold light lavished on people like us. You could put out your hand and feel the rush of years rounding your life into these days of ours. From somewhere a leaf came gliding slowly down and rested on the lawn. Remember that scene? Inside it you folded the last of your jealousy and hate, and all those deeds so hard to forget. Absolution. Swish. You took the past into your mouth and swallowed it. Warm, thin, bitter, and good. William Stafford, 1914 to 1993. Earlier this year, I asked Bill Stafford if he would send me some poems to consider for Wilderness magazine, then asked for another batch when none of the first rang my bell. He gladly sent more and wrote, please don't hover over long on any of what I send, for I know you must juggle many considerations when selecting for publication. And I guarantee you, there has never been a more generous cover letter to an editor from a poet who was himself a former poet laureate of the United States, a National Book Award winner, and one of the best-loved poets in the land. There's never been a more generous sentence written in such a letter, I'm just sure. And he also said, "And I always have hopes of rallying something overwhelming sooner or later." I heard him say that variance of that more than once. I was reminded of a comment he'd made at a reading years ago. He had confessed a chief regret about his work. Nothing vast, nothing of Tolstoyan proportions, as he put it, seemed to emerge from his early morning jottings. The regret may have been genuine, but it seems to me that the overwhelming in life and literature is exactly what Bill Stafford distrusted. He had little use for the heroic, the revolutionary, the rhetorically loud. He placed his faith in little things, in subtle clues and slight changes. He believed in dandelions, an extended hand, sunlight sliding across a floor. He believed in the lucky hunches that will rise to words given a chance in the still interval before dawn. The world was a rich place to Bill Stafford. He repaid it with a lifetime of alertness, and in the lively quiet of his poems, he calls forth ours. Conversation with Bill had a way of easy glancing, of roving many fields. His talk was as ready and welcoming as his verse. It never failed to refresh me, to leave me more centered, as if he were some magnet that could realign me with the genuine. Bill was the kind of house guest who hardly made a ripple. Once in our tiny cottage in California, he refused the one bed, this was a man in his 70s, and insisted on the living room floor. "This is luxury," he said. "I've slept in coal cars, you know." Not lately, he hadn't. A bowl of cereal in the morning, a cup of tea, and so long. He was off like a seed in the wind to plant his gospel elsewhere, to talk about trust and fertile errors, to read his poems from their small folded sheets. He published too many, it was commonly said. I wish he'd published more. Some were slight, some sounded like others, a few veered past like UFOs. But in any Stafford reading, any book, there were poems that lit like butterflies and stayed, slowly fanning their wings. And there were poems quiet in their means but meant to shock, poems in which a prophetic voice addressed us, calling us to wake from our tired, destructive certainties and look again. Poems that told us we live in an occupied country, misunderstood. Poems that told us your job is to find what the world is trying to be. Bill Stafford had something better to do than to exhibit his sensibility. He understood and did not shrink from the poet's ancient responsibility to think hard for us all. As my mother said one evening after I'd read to her from Someday Maybe, he tells us things we need to know without preaching. Like Henry Thoreau, Bill Stafford made an uncompromising witness of his life. Like Robinson Jeffers, he tried to deflate our obsessive sense of our own importance and show us to ourselves in actual scale. More tolerant and more generous than either, he stands in their tradition, and his best work will last with theirs. In a letter last summer, Bill mentioned that he would be 80 in January. No big deal, he wrote. I can hear him saying the same thing about his death, and I can hear him meaning it. Secure in where you have been, he wrote in passwords, you turn to the open sea and let go. When my wife came to my study door, her face stricken, a chickadee flew from the feeder outside the window. The empty feeder swayed. A breeze stirred the birch leaves into a chorus of lit moments. I'd been drinking a mug of tea, and after a while I did what Bill Stafford described in one of his poems, with neighbors one afternoon. I took the past into my mouth and swallowed it, warm, thin, bitter, and good. Thank you very much.